When Callum Whitmore pulled up to a red light on King Street West, he wasn't paying attention to the sidewalk. He was on his phone, half listening to his assistant run through the afternoon schedule, eyes drifting toward the window out of habit more than anything else. That's when he saw her. She was sitting against the brick wall of a closed shop, her coat too thin for an October morning in Toronto, a small cardboard sign propped against her knee. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, was asleep across her lap. Dark curls pressed against the woman's thigh, one small fist curled under her chin. The woman wasn't holding a cup. She wasn't asking anyone for anything. She was just sitting there, staring at the ground, her face so still it looked like she'd forgotten how to feel. Callum knew that face. He told his assistant he'd call back and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. It couldn't be. After 7 years in a city of 3 million people, on a Tuesday morning in October, it couldn't be Paige Alderton, but it was. He'd recognize the line of her jaw anywhere. The light turned green. He didn't move. The car behind him honked once, then twice. Callum pulled to the curb, put the car in park, and sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel, trying to figure out what exactly he was supposed to do. Before we start the story, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. We'd love to hear from all of you. Now let's get into it. Callum Whitmore was 38 years old, the founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital, a private equity firm headquartered in the financial district that managed just over $400 million in assets. He had grown up in Oakville, the son of a self-made contractor who believed that softness was something you could afford only after you'd made enough money to protect it. Callum had taken that lesson seriously, perhaps too seriously. He was the kind of man who remembered every number in a deal and forgot half the names of people he'd spoken to at dinner the night before. Efficient, some would say. Cold, said the others. He hadn't thought about Paige Alderton in years, or at least he'd told himself that. He got out of the car. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, the way people do when they've learned to track sounds without meaning to. For a second she didn't react. Then her eyes went wide, and something passed across her face. Not relief, not happiness. Something closer to shame. "Callum," she said. Her voice was steady, which surprised him. "Paige." He crouched down so he wasn't standing over her. The little girl stirred on her lap but didn't wake. "What happened?" She looked away. "Don't, I'm not. I'm just asking." "I know what you're doing," she said quietly. "Please don't." He looked at the child. Dark hair like Paige's. Small mouth pressed into a slight frown even in sleep. "Is she yours?" "Yes." "How old?" 3.5. He was quiet for a moment. The wind came off the lake and the woman pulled the edge of her coat tighter over the little girl's shoulder. The coat wasn't enough. It was 42 degrees. "Come with me," Callum said. "No, Paige." I said no. She finally looked at him. There was nothing weak in her expression. That was the thing that caught him off guard. She wasn't humiliated. She was exhausted, and there's a difference. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," he said, though he didn't know exactly what it was yet. "You're sitting on the sidewalk in October with a child who's cold. I'm not leaving you here." A long silence. The little girl opened her eyes, dark brown, serious, blinking slowly at Callum with the frank curiosity that only very small children. "Hi," Callum said. The girl looked at him. Then she looked up at her mother. Paige closed her eyes for a second. Then she said, "Her name is Brinley." He took them to the hotel suite he kept for out-of-town clients on Wellington Street. It was closer than his house, and he didn't want to spend 40 minutes in the car with Paige staring out the window in silence while he tried to figure out how to speak to her. The suite had 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a view of the CN Tower on clear days. A housekeeper named Denise met them at the door, and without being asked, disappeared into the kitchen and reappeared 10 minutes later with soup and toast and a warm blanket for Brinley. Callum watched Paige watch her daughter eat. The little girl wrapped both hands around the mug and drank with her eyes closed, cheeks slowly flushing pink. Whatever Paige was feeling, she kept it behind her eyes. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," Callum said from across the table. "I know," she said. "Tomorrow, if you want to. We can talk." She nodded, but she didn't look at him. When Brinley fell asleep on the couch with the blanket tucked under her chin, Paige sat with her arms crossed, staring at the carpet. Callum sat in the chair across from her, not looking at his phone for the first time all day. "You have a meeting at 7 tomorrow," she said finally. He blinked. "What?" "You had a Tuesday morning client call at 7, then a 9:30 at the firm. You were probably on your way in when you saw us." She glanced at him briefly. You haven't changed. You remember my calendar. I used to run your calendar, she said. Some things stay with you. He had no response to that. Paige had been his executive assistant for 2 years, from when she was 24 until she was 26. She'd been exceptional at the job. Organized, calm, nearly impossible to rattle. She'd also been the only person in the office who'd ever pushed back on him directly and been right often enough that he eventually stopped being annoyed about it and started listening. He hadn't replaced her well. He still hadn't, really. She'd left the firm without much warning. He'd assumed she'd gone to a competitor. He'd never asked. What happened? He said again. Quieter this time. She was still looking at the carpet. His name was Drew. We were together about 1.5 years. I was pregnant when we moved in together. He knew. He said he was ready. He wasn't. She paused. When Brinley was 8 months old, he left. Said he wasn't built for it. Cleaned out the joint account on his way out. Callum kept his expression flat, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. I went back to work as soon as I could find childcare I could afford. Contract work, mostly administrative, some bookkeeping. Enough. For a while. She exhaled slowly. Then the woman who was watching Brinley moved to be closer to her own family. I couldn't afford the agency alternatives. I missed shifts. I lost the contracts. The landlord, she stopped. That's the short version. How long have you been outside? 6 weeks, she said, on and off. There's a shelter on Spadina. They have family spots, but you have to be out by 7 a.m. Some days we come back at night. Some days there isn't room. She said it all with the same flat, measured tone she used to use when she was walking him through a quarterly report. That unsettled him more than anything else. He said nothing for a long time. Then, you're staying here, both of you. She shook her head. Callum, it's not a conversation. I'm not your employee anymore. No, he agreed, you're not. Which means I'm not asking because it's practical. I'm asking because you're sitting in front of me and Brinley is 3 years old and sleeping on a hotel couch and it's the right thing to do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let me help, that's all I'm asking. She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her expression. He'd never fully been able to, which had always frustrated him. 1 week, she said finally. 2. She almost smiled at that. Almost. You haven't changed at all. They settled into something like a routine over the following days. Paige was up before Callum every morning. Always had coffee made. Always had Brinley fed by the time he stopped by before his commute. The first few times he offered to take them to breakfast, she said no. The 4th time she agreed, and brought Brinley, who ate half a stack of pancakes and fell asleep on Paige's shoulder in the cab home. He didn't ask about her plans. She didn't ask for anything. But he watched her, not in the way he used to watch her work. Cataloging efficiency and outputs, differently now. He noticed how she read to Brinley every night with the same quiet patience, how she never once complained, how she found humor in small things and laughed softly, mostly to herself, when Brinley said something unexpected. She was still the same person, that was the thing. 6 weeks of sleeping on shelter cots hadn't changed who she was. He found that both admirable and somehow hard to sit with. On the 5th day, Callum came back from the office to find her at the kitchenette table with her laptop open. She'd borrowed it from him. Working through what looked like a job listing spreadsheet. She had 8 tabs open. Can I look? He asked. She turned the laptop toward him. Administrative roles, most of them. 1 junior operations manager position, 1 HR coordinator. She'd ranked them by estimated commute time and whether they offered flexibility on start times. The flexibility column, he said. I can't send Brinley to daycare at 7 a.m., she said simply. She's 3. Some places open at 8, some at 8:30. So the job has to start at 9, minimum, or I need to work somewhere with flex start. What's your ideal situation? He asked. If you could structure it. She thought about it for a second. Actually thought, not just deflected. Remote, or hybrid. I was good at project management. Not just coordination, actual process design. Setting up systems, tracking deliverables. I did a lot of it for you informally. It never had a title. It should have had a title, he said. She gave him a dry look. It should have had a salary bump, but that's a different conversation. Fair, he said. He sat down across from her. Whitmore Capital is restructuring its operations team. I've been looking for a project coordinator, someone who can build out the internal workflow systems, not just manage them. It's contract initially with the intention to make it permanent. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to take a job just because you feel responsible for me. I don't feel responsible for you, he said. I feel guilty that I never noticed you were being underused when you worked for me. That's different. He paused. The position is real. I was going to post it this week. I'm offering it to you first because I know your work and I know you're qualified. That's the full story. She held his gaze for a long moment. I'd need to see the actual scope. He emailed it to her that night. She came back with notes the next morning. 14 points. Several of which identified gaps in his own brief that he hadn't noticed. He read them at his desk and sat quietly for a full minute afterward. He called his operations director and said the hire was moving forward. Let's take a little break. If you've made it this far in the story, type Maple in the comments. Only the real ones will know. Now, back to where we were. 3 weeks after Paige and Brindley had come to stay at the Wellington suite, Callum's phone buzzed with a message from his friend and former business partner, Stuart Crane. Heard you've got a woman staying at the Wellington property. You want to fill me in before I hear it from someone else? Callum replied. Nothing to fill you in on. Stuart called him instead. Callum, come on. She's a former employee who needed somewhere to stay. She's also now a current contractor. It's straightforward. Is she the one from before? The assistant? Paige something? Where did you hear that? Someone at the firm mentioned it. You know how it gets. Stuart paused. Look, I'm not judging. I just want to make sure you're not making decisions with your emotions rather than your head. I am aware of the distinction, Callum said. Thank you. He hung up and sat with the call for longer than he'd have liked. Not because Stuart was right, but because he wasn't entirely wrong either, and Callum knew it. What he felt for Paige wasn't something he'd named. He wasn't sure it needed a name yet, but when he came back to the suite in the evenings and heard Brindley's voice through the door, higher, I can reach it, and found her standing on the coffee table, while Paige held both her hands, trying to touch the ceiling. Something happened to his chest that he didn't know what to do with. He'd built a company on certainty. He wasn't comfortable in the spaces where he didn't know the answer. He kept it to himself. The situation changed on a Thursday evening in early November. Paige was in the suite's small living room when Callum got home. She wasn't reading, wasn't working. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, Brindley asleep in the next room, staring at nothing in particular. He recognized the expression. Something had happened. He set his bag down. What is it? She looked up. Drew called. Callum waited. He's back in Toronto. He says he wants to be part of Brindley's life. She let out a long, slow breath. He wants to meet her. What do you want? She shook her head. I don't know. Part of me, she stopped. Part of me wants to say no. Protect her from someone who's going to disappear again. But she's going to ask about her dad eventually. She already does sometimes. She calls him the man in the picture, because there's an old photo I kept. Her voice was even, but her hands weren't. One was pressed flat against her knee, hard. I don't know what's right. Do you trust him? She laughed, short and without warmth. No. Then don't let him in until you do, Callum said. You're not obligated to hand your daughter over to someone who walked away from her at 8 months old just because he's decided he's ready now. That's not how it works. She looked at him. That's surprisingly direct. I'm not known for being subtle. No, she agreed. You're not. A pause. He was awful on the phone, not aggressive, just indifferent, like he was doing me a favor by calling, like I should be grateful. She shook her head. I'm not going to let him in and out of her life whenever it's convenient for him. If he wants to be her father, he shows up every time. Not just when it suits him. That's the right instinct, Callum said. She met his eyes. You sound sure. I am. She held his gaze for a moment longer than felt casual. Then she looked away, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the quiet between them was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. She called Drew back 2 days later. Callum didn't ask what she said. She told him anyway. She'd said that Brindley wasn't available for a casual visit from someone she didn't know. That if Drew wanted a relationship with his daughter, it would need to be consistent, structured, and through a family mediator. That she wasn't angry, she wasn't punishing him. She was just making clear what Brindley needed. Drew had said that was unreasonable. Then he'd said some other things that were worse. Then he'd hung up. She told Callum this over breakfast while Brindley ate a bowl of oatmeal and dropped raisins into it one by one with profound concentration. Paige's voice was calm throughout. When she finished, she picked up her coffee mug and looked out the window and said, I feel like I can breathe again. Good, he said. I kept waiting to feel guilty. I don't. You shouldn't. I know. She smiled. A real one, small and private, mostly to herself. I just needed to say it out loud. Brindley looked up from her oatmeal. Mama, can I have more raisins? You have plenty of raisins, Paige said. I want more. Bryn, please? Callum pushed the raisin container across the table. Brinley looked at him with enormous solemnity and then helped herself to a fistful. Paige pressed her lips together, visibly trying not to laugh. You're not helping, she told him. I'm an only child, he said. I never had to negotiate with anyone. She did laugh then, properly, and the sound of it did something to the room. The work was going well. Better than well, actually. 3 weeks into the contract, Callum's operations director, Miles, sent an email to the full firm. The new intake workflow is live. First one we haven't had to rebuild mid-cycle in about 2 years. Credit to Paige Alderton for actually reading the previous versions and figuring out where they were breaking down. Callum forwarded it to her. She replied, Tell Miles he's welcome. Also, your onboarding documentation has 7 versions and none of them agree with each other. I'm fixing that next. He showed it to his assistant, who read it and said, I like her. She used to work here, Callum said. I know, his assistant said. I looked her up. She's the reason the Q3 reporting format makes sense. She built that before she left. A pause. You let her go. She left, he said. His assistant gave him a look that was eloquent in its restraint and went back to her desk. He sat with that for a while. That evening, he stopped by the suite on his way home. He didn't always. Sometimes he just went to his apartment. But tonight he knocked, and when Paige opened the door, she had a spreadsheet printed on paper and was holding a red pen. You still print things, he said. I think better on paper, she said. Come in. Brinley was at the table with a coloring book. She'd decided sometime in the previous week that Callum was allowed to sit next to her, which felt, in some way he couldn't fully articulate, like more of an honor than most things he'd been given in the last 5 years. He sat. She pushed a green crayon toward him without looking up. I'm supposed to color this, he said, looking at an outline of a bear. The grass, Brinley said with authority. He colored the grass. He did it carefully, which made her squint at him. You're going outside the lines, she told him. That's fine, he said. Grass doesn't have perfect edges. She considered this with the gravity of a small person encountering a new idea. Then she went back to her own page. Paige was watching from the other side of the table. She had the same expression she got sometimes when she was looking at something she hadn't expected to find there, like it caught her off guard. She dropped her eyes back to her spreadsheet before he could say anything. It was Brinley, as it turned out, who said the thing that neither of them had managed to say. They'd been out to a park near the waterfront on a Saturday. Paige's idea, a small concession to the fact that Brinley had started referring to hotel rooms as where we live and needed a change of scenery. The lake was gray and flat and cold, but Brinley didn't care. She ran circles around a tree for 10 full minutes, then sat in a pile of leaves and announced that she was a bird. What kind of bird? Callum said. The big kind, she said. A goose? She thought about it. Yes, a goose. He sat on a nearby bench. Paige sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. She'd been a little quiet all morning. Not unhappy, just somewhere else. She's going to start asking questions, Paige said. About what? About you. A pause. About why you're around. About what you are to us. He looked at her. She was watching Brinley throw leaves in the air and watch them fall. What do you want to tell her? He asked. Paige was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know what's true yet. He thought about that. What would you need to know for it to be true? She turned to look at him. The wind was doing something to her hair, and she tucked a strand behind her ear. An automatic gesture. The kind of small thing that shouldn't mean much. That you're not helping us out of guilt, she said. Or pity. Or because it's easier to manage a situation than to walk away from it. I'm not, he said. You told yourself that in the beginning. I know, he said. It's not what it is now. She held his gaze. Then what is it? He didn't answer right away. He'd spent 48 hours the previous week writing an 8-page investment thesis on a healthcare portfolio. He could account for every assumption. He could defend every number. But this, sitting on a park bench in November while a 3-year-old declared herself a goose, this he couldn't reduce to a memo. I don't want to go home to my apartment, he said. I've had it for 6 years and I've never minded. Now I mind. He looked at her. That started about a month ago. She was very still. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I know where you are. I know what you've been through, and I'm not about to put something else on your plate that you have to figure out. I just wanted to answer your question honestly. Brinley came running back and crashed into Paige's knees. Can we get hot chocolate? Yes, Paige said, after a second. Her voice was a little softer than usual. We can get hot chocolate. She glanced at Callum sideways, and he saw it. The beginning of something, not named, not finished, but real. They had a harder conversation 3 weeks later. It started because of something small. Callum had his assistant book tickets to a charity gala he had to attend, and without thinking, he'd booked 2. He mentioned it to Paige in passing. She got very quiet. "You booked 2 tickets," she said. "Yes. You didn't ask me." He paused. "I should have asked you." "You're right." She looked at him. "Do you know how long it took me to feel like I had any say in what my life looked like? After Drew, after the last year, I spent so long just reacting to things, surviving whatever came next." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge in it. "I can't go back to being managed. Even kindly. That's fair," he said. "I need you to ask me," she said. "Not assume." "I understand," he said. "I'm sorry. I'm not good at this." "No," she agreed. "You're not a beat, but you're learning." "Which is more than I expected, honestly." He nodded. He thought about what she'd said for the rest of the evening, and again the next morning on his commute, sitting with the particular discomfort of recognizing a pattern in himself that he didn't like. He sent her a message that afternoon. "The gala is on the 14th. I'd like it if you came with me. Would you want to?" Her reply took a while. Then, "Yes, but I'm wearing what I want to wear." He wrote back, obviously. She sent a small laughing emoji. He looked at it for an embarrassingly long time. "Now let's play a little game. For everyone who's made it this far, type Tim Hortons in the comments. You know who you are." And now, back to the story. The gala was at the Fairmont Royal York. Paige wore a deep green dress she'd found at a consignment shop in Kensington Market. She told him this with a kind of defiant straightforwardness, like she was daring him to have an opinion about it. He didn't have an opinion. He had a different problem, which was that he couldn't stop noticing her the entire night. And he knew enough people in that room that it was becoming a professional liability. She was extraordinary at it. She'd met half a dozen people he hadn't introduced her to, simply by being in the right place when the right conversation started. She remembered names. She asked questions that made people feel like they were interesting. By the end of the evening, 2 of his colleagues had separately told him she was impressive, using the exact same word. In the car home, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Your friend Stuart was there. He didn't like me." "Stuart doesn't like most people until they've proven they're not trying to take something from him," Callum said. "Give him time." "He asked me how I knew you," she said. "I told him I used to work for you." He said, "Just work?" She looked out the window. "I told him that was a rather personal question for someone I'd just met." Callum felt a cold flicker of irritation. "What did he say to that?" He laughed. "Like I'd passed some kind of test." She shook her head slightly. "I don't like being tested." "No one does," he said. She turned to look at him. "He's going to keep wondering what this is. Other people will too." "Let them wonder," he said. She was quiet. Then, "Callum, what do you want this to be?" He looked at her in the dim light of the car. Outside, the city moved past them, all lit amber and white, the way Toronto looks in November when it's trying to be beautiful. "I want it to be real," he said. "Whatever that takes. I'm willing to figure that out if you are." She held his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then she reached over and put her hand on his, not taking it exactly, just resting it there. It was a small thing. It meant everything. "Okay," she said. "We figure it out." They did. Not neatly and not all at once. Paige moved out of the Wellington suite in December into a real apartment, a second-floor 2-bedroom in Trinity Bellwoods, with a clawfoot tub that Brinley immediately claimed as her personal reading spot. The firm made her contract permanent in January. Miles emailed the entire office again, this time with 3 paragraphs about the new compliance tracking system she'd built, and 3 people in the firm asked Callum separately where she'd come from. "She worked here before," he always said. "And you let her leave?" they always said. He had no good answer to that. He and Paige took things slowly, in the way that 2 people take things slowly when they're both old enough to know what rushing costs. He met her best friend from university, Jenna, who looked him over with the forensic attention of someone who would not be charmed and would report back, honestly. He took Brinley to the Ontario Science Centre on a Saturday afternoon, while Paige had a rare few hours to herself, and they spent 2 hours in the water section until they were both damp, and Brinley had explained to him, in careful detail, the entire life cycle of a frog. "Did you know frogs lay 1,000 eggs?" she said. "I didn't. Some of them don't hatch," she said, "but some do." He thought about that on the drive back, more than a child's biology fact probably deserved. In March, Callum found out, through his firm's legal department, In the process of a background search on a prospective hire, that Drew had filed for a small claims dispute against Paige the previous autumn over what he claimed was a shared deposit on an apartment they'd rented together. The claim had been filed just before he'd stopped paying child support entirely. He didn't say anything to Paige about what he'd learned, but he did call his firm's legal team and ask them to connect Paige with a family lawyer they worked with regularly. He framed it as a benefit of her permanent contract, which it was, as of that day, after he'd updated the firm's benefits documentation. When she found out, which she did, because she was thorough about everything, she called him directly. The legal benefit, she said. Yes, that wasn't in my offer letter. We added it, he said. Callum, I know, he said. I should have told you, I'm still learning. A pause. Then the lawyer is good. She helped me understand that the claim has almost no merit and that his child support arrears are significant enough to actually pursue. Another pause, shorter. Thank you, you would have figured it out, he said. I just shortened the timeline. You keep doing that, she said quietly, shortening the distance between where I am and where things could be. He didn't know what to say to that, which was rare for him. He said, Paige, yeah, are you doing okay? A small, real laugh. I'm doing really well, actually. A pause. That still surprises me every time I notice it. By the time the days got longer and the Toronto waterfront shook off winter and became somewhere people actually wanted to be, something had settled between Callum and Paige that didn't need to be announced to anyone. Brinley called him Cal, which he'd never been called in his life, and which he found he didn't mind at all. She'd decided he was allowed to read her bedtime stories on the nights he stayed for dinner, a process during which he'd learned that she had strong opinions about voice characterization and would correct him if a dragon sounded too friendly. Dragons aren't friendly, she'd say. This one might be, he'd say. Cal, she'd say, with the weary authority of someone who had been over this before. He made her laugh sometimes, which he found entirely disproportionately satisfying for a man who ran a $400 million firm. One evening in May, sitting on Paige's small back porch while Brinley chased a moth around the backyard with a colander, she'd said she was going to catch it, though she had no plan for what came next. Paige leaned her head against Callum's shoulder. Not dramatically, just settled there, like it was where it belonged. I keep thinking about something, she said. What? That morning on King Street, you were at a red light. If it had turned green a second earlier, you would have driven away. He thought about that. I wouldn't have seen you. Exactly. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not a person who believes in things happening for a reason. I've seen too much that doesn't have one. She paused. But I keep thinking about that light. He put his arm around her. It was a long light, he said. King and Bathurst always is. She laughed softly. That's the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I prefer accurate, he said. She tilted her head up to look at him. I know you do then, more quietly. I'm glad you stopped. In the yard, Brinley held up the colander in triumph. The moth was not in it. She didn't seem to notice. I'm glad too, Callum said, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about anything other than exactly where he was.